The most consistent thing about the Kansas Jayhawks basketball team this year, they are consistently inconsistent. They lose again on Saturday, this time to K-State.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on? Derek Johnson here. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day. Thank you to the everydayers catching each and every show. And thank you wherever you're getting it, whether it's anywhere you get your podcast or on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. On today's edition of Locked On Jayhawks, we are recapping KU's loss to Kansas State, 81-73. What went wrong again for KU? They continue to not really be able to find energy and identity, momentum, all those sort of things, what this loss means. And something that I find very interesting about some of these recent losses for KU, I've found kind of an interesting, or just recent games, interesting trend that could be a bad thing for Kansas. And then we'll get into some game trophies and what's next for KU on this episode of the show. It is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Super Bowl 59 is here, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started today. Kansas falls 81-73 in Manhattan. They have now lost 3 straight games in Manhattan. I think the stat that was going around was they've lost 3 straight games in Manhattan for the first time in like 40 years. So they keep making history on Saturdays, right? You blew your biggest lead ever in school history and last Saturday against Baylor. I don't think there was anything necessarily historical about the Houston game, but like certainly how it lost felt historical. The people remember that one for a while, and now there's history in this one too. So yeah, that's not a great thing to have, that you keep getting history in the negative seemingly each and every week. But there's no momentum now for Kansas because you got smacked in this game. You had an opportunity after beating Iowa State on Monday to try to build some stuff together, right? They've got some winnable games in front of them, although I am starting to worry because based on, you know, how they consistently do have some letdown games and stuff like that, like even though we are viewing this next 4 games as versus Colorado, at Utah, at BYU, versus Oklahoma State as all winnable games, they're going to lose one of those games, like, or they'll go like 2-2. Like that is how this team, and then at Colorado after that, like they're going to go 3-2 in that 5-game stretch. Watch, like that'll be the case where it's like, okay, this should be an opportunity to rack up some wins, and then they're going to lose 2 of them. Like that just feels like how this season is going. Now, who knows? Hopefully that's not the case, but like, I am at a loss for words because does anyone know what this team is? You know, you look at some of the metric sites, they're still like top 10-ish team in the country. Are they good? Are they okay? Are they mid? Like I'm just so lost. I'm so dumbfounded. And then you look at the specific game, right? You look at the stat sheet afterward. Kansas shot 50% from the field. They led by 4 in points in the paint. They out-rebounded Kansas State, and they never really had a chance of winning. Like this never really felt like a game after the first, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes of game time. I guess you go on that little run at the end of the first half before David Gasson hits that crazy shot. But really for the full second half, like Kansas was out of, I don't know, they weren't really within striking distance the whole way. And that's what's crazy about it. Like, it's not like you had just this, oh, you shot 35%. Like, of course you're not going to win games like that. No, you usually win games when you shoot 50%, especially in the Bill Self era. Like, I don't know if it's, this team, just this core of team, or like some of the play, I don't know if it's just like when they reach any sign of adversity, there's just like not that mental fortitude to get over it. I don't know if it's just a team that doesn't play with enough urgency, and there is kind of this maybe laid back mentality of, hey, like it'll be fine, we'll figure it out, yada, 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 and you'd never have that urgency in a specific game. I just don't know if it's just they're not that talented, if they're just not that good, or what. But I found this very interesting from Bill Self after the game. He said, quote, "It's been very difficult for us, for whatever reason, to string games of superb energy back to back, or even consistently at all. There are times against elite teams we can lock anybody down, and there's times that we can't guard our shadow." It's very interesting because it kind of backs up what we've all been seeing, that like, right? I mean, it's not just a week to week thing, right? Where it's like 1 week they might look good, 1 week they might look bad. It's not just a game to game thing, right? Like you look great on Monday against Iowa State, you look horrible on Saturday against Kansas State, you look horrible in this against Baylor on Saturday. But it's also a half to half thing, right? You look horrible in the second half against Baylor. You look good in the first half against Baylor. You look great in the second half against West Virginia. You look horrible in the first half against West Virginia, right? This team is so inconsistent. And it doesn't just stretch to one game to the next. In the case of this week, it did, but it stretches to the course of half to half. And it's like impossible for this team to play the same way, to play with the high end energy that they need to play with for one half to the next. And it's crazy that they haven't been able to do that. And the struggles have been everywhere too for KU. And it feels like one of those things where it's like, like this game, okay, you got strong performance from, I don't know, Hunter Dickinson, and 15 from Zeke Mayo and 13 from KJ Adams. That's great. But then like next game, one of those guys will have a tough game, right? And that's how it is. And like Rylan Griffin, since entering the starting lineup, is 2 of 11 from 3. And a lot of those have been really good looks. He was 1 for 7 from the floor this game. And so like, there are other games where Rylan, like the Houston game, Rylan Griffin's great, and that's not a problem at all. And now all of a sudden Rylan Griffin, like it is a problem that you're not making shots, right? Flory has been struggling lately. I know the 6 points, 4 rebounds in 16 minutes, like that looks fine from just, averaging out the minutes sort of thing. But like, he just wasn't the same guy in this one. Dajuan was solid, but you can't get those early fouls, right? When you're a 6th-year player. Shaq Moore and Diggy Coit, like you haven't been getting nearly the same contributions from them the last couple of games than what you were maybe, when Shaq Moore first entered the lineup, or Diggy Coit a few games ago. And then, like I said, like it just feels like, okay, some of those things that were problems in today's game, some of them will get better for next game, and then other ones will get worse. There's just so much inconsistency around for KU as a team right now. And honestly, I have this listed on here. If you're watching on YouTube, you might be thinking, okay, what is the turnover issue? They didn't have like a ton of turnover. No, this is the defensive turnovers. Honestly, maybe my biggest like long-term worry, if you're just talking about this game specifically, long-term takeaways that continued today, is Kansas has a serious problem not forcing turnovers. So Kansas State had just 10 turnovers, which was 8 until the last like minute and change of the game. Since January 18th, which was the win against Kansas State, Kansas has forced just 55 turnovers in 7 games. That's about 8 turnovers forced per game on the defensive end for Kansas. But if you take out the Baylor game, the other 6 games in that stretch, Kansas is netting just 6.5 turnovers forced per game. 6.5, that's it. Coastal Carolina is literally last nationally in turnovers forced per game at a higher number of 7.1 per game. And if you go by turnover rate, as opposed to just raw turnovers, 4 of KU's 5 worst turnover rate defense games of the season are since January 18th. So prior to that stretch, Kansas was averaging 11.5 turnovers forced per game. Now during this stretch, you're basically outside of the Baylor game, only forcing 6 or 7 turnovers per game. That's a sizable difference. That basically means in this recent stretch of games, outside of, again, the Baylor game, you were the worst turnover forced team in the country, right? And those are plays that don't just create stops for you, but they also can create easy buckets for you. They can also be momentum swings. They can be momentum changers. That is a huge issue for Kansas. And I think it speaks to the lack of, consistent effort that you kind of see when you watch this team, that it's not always that high energy. And I don't think this applies for everybody. I think there are certain players that play with that effort and energy at all times, but it's not for everybody. And I think you see that, right? You can't get a steal. You can't get a turnover if you're not around the ball. You can't get a steal. You can't get a turnover if you're not active, if you're not pressuring the basketball. And right now what you're seeing is a lack of an ability to do that for KU. Now, beyond that, you couldn't defend the 3. Kansas State goes 41% from 3, 11 of 27. They were plus 15 in terms of the points attributed to made threes in this game. Kansas continues to suck on free throws, 58% today. And a couple areas that we highlighted before the game, 2 of our keys of the game. One of them was scoring in transition, because Kansas State had not been a great transition defense to this point in time. You only had 6 fast break points. They outscored you, I think it was 12-6 or 14-6 in fast break points. So an area that you needed to do well today, you got outscored there. And then the other one was, we mentioned shooting inside, right? Like making your shots around the rim. Kansas in the first meeting was great around the rim. They were 16 of 18 on shots at the rim in the first meeting with Kansas State. And you look at it, that tends to be Kansas's bread and butter if they can, get on the inside. But in this game, Kansas went just 8 of 17 on layups, right? And we mentioned this before, that Kansas on the road this season, coming into this game, was only shooting 64% at the rim compared to their season-long average, which is 68.5% or 64% in road conference games. So there was a sizable dip there, right? They hadn't played as well on the road, and that continued today. You would think that a team as experienced as Kansas, Ken Palm has them as the number 1 most experienced team in the country, would not be as fazed by the road environments as they are, but that is another unfortunate thing. So bottom line here, This one's crazy. The Scott Drew coaching staff just kind of owns you at home. You've lost 5 straight to Scott Drew himself in Waco, right? You're doing fine against them in Allen Fieldhouse, but on the road, 5 straight to Scott Drew. You've lost 3 straight to Jerome Tang, who was from the Scott Drew line, and then Grant McCasland, the head coach of Texas Tech, who this will be his second year on the job. So they only had the one so far. They lost in Lubbock last year. So that is a lot of success for that tree. I don't know if there's something there. I don't know if they've figured something out and they're helping out each other. I don't know. But failure to capitalize momentum off Monday. And honestly, that's kind of been the story of this team, really, the last 2 years. It feels like when you have those moments of people being ready to, okay, I'm ready to buy back in, you just can't string it together. And whether it's too flawed or too inconsistent or both, it just feels like coming back to the drawing board. And I don't know, is that drawing board something that can be drawn up this year, or is that something that has to wait till the offseason? I'm hoping that it's something they can figure out for this year, but I know a lot of KU fans who are watching lots of Darren Peterson highlights right now. Let's just put it that way. All right, let's continue on game awards and what's next for KU. This episode of the show is brought to you by PrizePicks. The big game's almost here, and there's no better way to make it even more exciting than with PrizePicks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings awarded, PrizePicks makes it fun and simple to get in on the action. Here's how it works. You pick more or less on at least 2 players' projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. PrizePicks even has a free pick for the big game, Patrick Mahomes only needs to throw 1 yard to win. Pair that with one more correct pick and you're cashing out. You can also get in on the golf action, on NHL, MLB. There's future ones in there. You can get the NBA, college basketball. You can even combine different sports. So download the app today and use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. Continuing on Locked On Jayhawks, and don't forget to make Locked On College Basketball your second listen, or Locked On Big 12 if you want to see what's going on around the conference. All right, game trophies for KU. Let's start with best moment. I don't know, man. Again, you were kind of just out of this, it felt like, for the entirety of that second half. So usually the best moments are going to be there when it's more like winning time. I guess you could say the early on Hunter Dickinson alley-oop to KJ Adams, that was a really cool play, early in the game. Honestly, before David Gasson hit that crazy shot, the little 5-0 run you went on where it was, I think it was Zeke Mayo hitting the 3, and then you score another bucket. I think it was a Flory dunk from there that cuts it down to, being a 6-point game, 42-36, where it looked like, okay, maybe you're still within striking distance. You didn't have a great first half, but you're still right there, right? And you'll have a little bit of momentum going into the halftime locker room, but then we know what happened right after that, which was not great. So those would be the ones that would stick out to me. There was another, I guess, a Zeke Mayo transition 3 in the early part of the game that made it 17-16 or something like that. But yeah, man, I don't know. Worst moments of the game, Dajuan picking up the 3 first half fouls. Again, something that you can't do as a 6-year point guard. You can't put yourself in that position. And at the same point in time, I think probably good reminder that, it's weird because it's one of those things where it's clearly Kansas is missing the Frank Mason, Devontae Graham type point guard, right? Where they have an All-American level point guard and somebody who can get a bucket for them. That is being missed. At the same point in time, this team doesn't have any other options to do what Dajuan does. And so when Dajuan's not, it's like Frank or Devontae not being there, okay, here's Dajuan. And then when Dajuan's not there, it's you're in trouble even more, right? And so it's one of those weird situations where his win above replacement, so to speak, is probably gigantic if you're comparing it to what the replacement would be on this team. But then also if you're comparing him to some of the unbelievable point guards, which I don't know, is that unfair to compare? And Bill Self's, best guys of Sharon Collins and Devontae Graham and Frank Mason, there's also something missing. And so it just pisses everybody off. Either people are mad, see, look, this is what happens when you don't have Dajuan, and you saying this is, or it upsets the other people where it's no, but they're not that guy. So no matter what, you can't win either way you look at it. But I do think Dajuan is very valuable to be on the court for this KU team, and they missed him in that first half for sure. Watching K-State fans boo David Coit after he got hit in the nuts and not thinking it's a foul call, that was kind of a fun one. Shaq Moore missing both free throws, then immediately on the other end going under a screen. I want to say it was Doug. Was it? I don't know. Somebody hit a three for K-State at that point. They all blended together, made so many. I think it was Doug McDaniel, but I could be off on that. But anyway, yeah, that was not a great sequence there. And then you had Hunter not even trying to stop that one alley-oop that they threw where the guy caught it in the middle of the lane and shot it like in the air on the alley-oop, even though he was 3-4 feet away from the hoop and just never got contested, just made it like a super easy play. And then at the other end, he missed both free throws. So like, both of those were not great sequences of guys missing both free throws and also making a bad defensive play. The David Gasson falling corner shot to end the half, that would probably be my pick here because, like I said, it felt like maybe you had a little bit of a run toward the end of the first half, and that just kind of squashed it in a way that was like you actually played great defense there. He just made an insane shot. I would say the whole second half, like, again, to me, felt like you didn't really have a chance of winning. You were kind of always at an arm's distance. And then every time K-State hit a three, which they hit plenty of them to go around. So lots to choose from there for KU. What is our appalling stat of the game? This was interesting to me. So if you would have told me K-State would have went off from three, I would have almost assumed that Brendan Housen, went off from three as well. And he made 3 3-pointers, like 3 of 10 from three isn't like a bad shooting night. It's below average for him, but it's fine. But I would have thought that he would have went if you told me he took 10 threes and Kansas State made 11 of them. I'd have been like, oh, he got hot. He was 5 of 10 or he was 6 of 10 from three. The fact that he went 3 of 10, which again is like a slightly below average day, the rest of the team went 8 of 17. That's pretty appalling to me, both in terms of the lack of 3-point defense for KU and how hot Kansas State was from the outside. The layups are the fast break points. We talked about those earlier. Kansas going 8 of 17 on layups after you were 16 of 18 at the rim. Against Kansas State now in Fieldhouse. That's not great, letting the road environment bother you. And then, I don't know, I guess I would say the last one here would probably be like the Dajuan Harris plus minus in a game where you felt like you were out of it for so long. Like Rylan Griffin was minus 10, AJ Storr was minus 7, Floyd Badungo was minus 5. Like a lot of guys were negative here. Dajuan Harris ended up being minus 1 in a game that you lost by 8 points, which certainly shows the impact of him not being on the court in that first half. Offensive MVP for KU. Zeke Mayo had 15 points. He was 3 for 3 from three, also had 5 assists, but he did have 5 turnovers. So I don't want to go with that. KJ Adams, if you're, 13 points, 6 of 9 from the floor, 2 offensive rebounds. He also had an assist, only 1 turnover. I think he gets credit too, but I think it has to be Hunter Dickinson, right? 21 points for Hunter, 8 of 16 from the floor. He had 2 really good offensive games. In the 2 games against Kansas State, basically 23 points per game in the 2 offensive games. Did have 3 turnovers, but overall Hunter was really good on the offensive end for KU. So he gets offensive MVP. Defensive MVP for Kansas. I don't know, man. This was not a good defensive game. Kansas State shot 50% from the floor. They went off from 3. You didn't force turnovers, so it kind of gets difficult when you're talking about that. This is weird because Shaquille Moore had 2 steals and 1 block. That's like the most chaos caused, but also like I didn't feel like Shaquille Moore made his presence felt on the defensive end in a weird way. If you're looking at Kansas State, like, really the entire starting 5 contributed. So you can't just like point to one guy and be like, oh, well, you were the best defender for KU. I guess you could say, well, KJ Adams, is helpful on the defensive end. And Coleman Hawkins had 12 points. Last time you played him, he had 15. And I don't know, the assist numbers were down 2 and the turnover numbers were up a little bit for Coleman Hawkins. So maybe you pick him. I don't know. I'm having a hard time picking a defensive MVP. So if you have one you feel strongly about, hit me up on Twitter at @TJohnsonRadio. All right, what's next for KU? We'll discuss on the other side. Our episode of the show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Super Bowl 59 is here. By the time you listen to this, who knows? Maybe if you're listening to this Monday morning, it already happened. But 1 game, 2 teams, endless possibilities, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's the icing on the cake. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, score $200 in bonus bets. That's at FanDuel.com. FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59 and the Locked On Podcast Network. Finish it up on this episode of the show, which we will be back on Monday. We're going to talk about Nana Owusu Anane. I'm going to probably have to get a name pronunciation before that happens, but he is going to be visiting Kansas, and it seems like Kansas is already working into the transfer portal for next year. So we'll get into that on Monday's episode of the show. Make sure you subscribe to the show anywhere you get your podcasts, including on our YouTube page. All right, what's next for KU? They're going to be versus Colorado. That's the upcoming game where they're wearing those hideous-looking jerseys. Cool story on the jerseys. They're kind of ugly, but whatever. If they play great in them, nobody cares. Honestly, if they win the game by like 30 points and, if you gave me that exchange, they'll wear the jerseys the rest of the season, but like they'll play better the rest of the way. I'm not even saying they got to win every game the rest of the way. Just like play better, play with energy the rest of the way. If that's the difference, boom, then I love them. They're the best jerseys ever. But anyway, versus Colorado coming up, and Colorado has been very bad this season. Like usually Tad Boyle, there hasn't been like a super high ceiling with Colorado when he's been there. Like they haven't had that season, although I think they were going to be pretty good in the COVID year in the tournament, but they haven't had that year where they've been like, oh, we made the Elite Eight and we were 3 seed or whatever it is. But usually they have like a high floor. Usually they're a very decent team. Well, guess what? They are 0-12 in Big 12 play. Now, they did just play Houston pretty close by 10, I guess, but that should be a game where you should win, and you should win by double digits. It's going to be alarming if Kansas has to skin or get that one out by the skin of their teeth. Then after that, you're going to be on the road for a little bit of a mountain trip if you're Kansas, and this can be tricky, right? So you're going to be at Utah on Saturday, at BYU the following Tuesday. And what I find interesting there is, what are they going to do with travel? Are they just going to stay out there for the whole time? Because that might be a good thing. You adjust to the altitude that's going to be there for KU. Otherwise, if you're bouncing back and forth in and out of the altitude with all that travel there, like you could absolutely see them losing one of those 2 games and, having tired legs and stuff like that. But I don't know. No game feels like a gimme at this point for KU, which is such a weird spot to be in from where we've been in so many past years where you're like, oh yeah, they'll win all those home games. And yeah, I mean, worst case, they'll get upset once or twice here on the road, but not every time. Now it's just like, I don't know, they might, right? Like, and I don't mean to be pessimistic here. Like, it's just where we are right now with things here. So hopefully they turn things around in these next 4 games and, they get hot, or these next 5 games, and then they're hot going into that final 3-game stretch, which is going to be a very difficult final 3-game stretch. And then, you're hot going into those and you go 2-1 in that. And then you feel like you're a new team headed in the Big 12 tournament, and who knows what can happen, right? That's the hope here over this next upcoming stretch. All right, that'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page. And we'll see you Monday for a little transfer portal deep dive on a target for KU already ahead of the 2025 offseason. See you then.